Hello and welcome back to Pulled Focus, where we are continuing to speak to filmmakers submitting for this year's Deep Fried Film Festival, which you'll be able to see online soon, and we will be sharing links for those. On today's show, we are welcoming a group of filmmakers. We have Daniel, Marcel and Daniel, who have submitted a film called A Place for Sailors. I'm going to pass over to the guys to introduce themselves in the film.
I'm Daniel Georgiev. I'm 22 years old, and I'm the director of A Place for Sailors.
I'm Daniel Moore, and I'm the producer of A Place for Sailors. And yeah, having two Daniels did make it rough, so we just came up with a nickname for me. So my name on set was Ross, just out of the blue, just to differentiate between the two Dans.
Hi, I'm Marcel, and I'm the editor for A Place for Sailors.
Right, thank you guys. We're going to have a wee quick look at the film. So it's a very atmospheric and haunting film when you're watching it. What inspired you guys to make it?
From the get-go, I was pretty inspired to make something to immerse the viewer. When we got together, we all discussed, and we basically came to the conclusion that we weren't very interested in finding some subjects that were, interview people or find something directly to talk to or interview. But personally, I'm very interested in historical stuff, generally in histories. And one of the first ideas was, to visit the Abbey and make something around the Abbey. And the whole audiovisual experience is just without, cutting away any interviews and not having a specific kind of plot point, kind of like a painting to immerse the viewer.
Like a portrait of a lost time. I know, Dan, you went to Whitby kind of just by yourself, and you were smitten by it straight away, weren't you?
Yeah. It was that first time, and then we did several trips afterwards because we were always exploring what to do, like in terms of with the documentary, because it was always on the move until we, even after the shoots. But we went there several times, and ourselves we got very immersed into Whitby and its atmosphere, and start to feel into some of its historical, the jet jewelry history and some of the industries there.
So is that the reason that you chose Whitby, or was it somewhere that you'd been on your travels?
Yeah, because I had been there in Whitby, so it just felt just the place I picked felt natural to pick that place and to set and explore making a film with an atmosphere like this.
Yeah, because we were all based in Leeds, West Yorkshire, so it was about, what was it for you, about an hour and a half drive?
Yes.
So it was just kind of going there and liking it, and over a few trips, did a couple of test shoots, and it kind of developed as it went quite organically between a few different ideas that we can maybe come on to later, potentially. Yeah, it was really the place, starting with it and trying to capture that feeling of a lost time.
So the three of you are in very different locations just now. So Norway, Arizona, and Leeds. How did you get together, or what brought you into the project together?
Well, we're all students at Northern Film School. So at the time, we were all in Leeds working together on our first year documentary. So it's only since then that we've spread out. But during the editing process, we were all in the same countries that we currently are in now. So editing was a bit interesting, kind of doing it all online, little adjustments, things like that.
So
Yeah.
that must have been quite a challenge for you.
Yeah, it was. But it was good because we really, I appreciated it as the editor because I had a chance to test stuff, to experiment. And then I'd wake up really early with the time difference, send something off. It would be nighttime for them. It would be morning for me. And just, we would look at it and finagle it. Oh no, let's try swapping out this shot. We had so much material. When we were shooting, we split into two groups and of two each, and then a separate person doing sound. And we shot for 2 days completely just straight. So we had so much raw material to look through. So it was kind of fun. We really got to not find the story because we had an idea, but find the narrative really.
Yeah, it was quite painful cutting down so much as well, because there are lots of little nice moments, but we really just gave Marcel, free reign on the first couple cuts to just see what felt right, and then we kind of worked from there. But yeah, there was a lot of extra footage, and we actually cut out an entire extra segment that would have added about a minute to it. So we had a few difficult chats deciding whether to cut it, but we did in the end. And we at least feel that the length is about okay for the sort of atmospheric piece it is. But that was a tricky choice, cutting out a scene that we did all quite like.
And it is very atmospheric, and it is shot in black and white. Did Whitby's associations with Dracula have any sort of influence on the atmosphere that you were building there?
Subconsciously, it might have, because certainly I knew about the history and the link of with Dracula and Whitby. And it was at one point developing the story. It was considered if we are going to include that or we're going to touch upon that history at all. But shooting the Abbey definitely, it's hard to kind of pull away from that. But in a way, I'm not including any evidence of story with Dracula in the atmospheric film. I think we don't really touch anything upon Dracula, or some of the atmospheric might be inspired, inspired the atmosphere in the film, but nothing narratively.
We'd started thinking about Whitby Abbey, and on one of our earlier visits, we'd actually gone there to maybe consider finding a few different artistic interpretations and representations of the Abbey, and what it felt like to live kind of in that conflict of having this kind of heritage site, while also having some of the parades that would go through with the Bram Stoker Fest. And then it kind of morphed from that into that feeling. We met someone actually, Dan, if you want to talk about the man we met that changed our direction, and we just kind of kept the tone that we were looking for, but we kind of stripped the narrative back quite a lot and made it kind of more of a flowing piece as opposed to a conventional narrative.
Yeah, because there's a lot of elements at Whitby that we could have easily focused on. Like they have recurring festivals, and there's Dracula, and there's the jet industry, and a lot of shipping and fishing industry. So, but generally finding the atmosphere we wanted, we met this guy called Jeff, and he was a local, quite old. So the way he talked, we just had a pint with him in the pub, and the way he talked about, some of the history about Whitby, he was quite sad, and because he was reminiscing about the history in a very, you know, a very specific way. But the way he did it inspired, I think, a lot of the atmosphere. Because we also considered interviewing him, but we dropped that, and instead went of an impression of, or our impression of Whitby after being there several times and speaking to this local. I think mostly what shows through in the film is how we felt Whitby. Not very factual, not very, presenting stuff that could be in the museum there or that could be directly from the locals, but how we felt the place.
And you guys have all met as students to work on films and this A Place for Sailors in particular. What's your impression of the support for filmmakers in the UK?
I'll be the first to admit that I'm not too well versed with all of that. I'm probably a bit kind of sheltered filmmaking wise. With support, it's tricky because all the projects that I've worked on have been completely self-funded. I haven't actually done any crowdfunding, but for a film that I've been in a creative, capacity or role. So it's mainly been trying to make use of locations and doing a lot of groundwork beforehand. Setting up relationships with different people and authorities. So for this, I tried to, do as much as possible beforehand. I contacted the Sutcliffe Gallery, who, they were very well known. So it was it Robert Sutcliffe? Should really know this. Gallery. We talked to the museum there. We got permission to use paintings, and we talked about taking professional pictures of the paintings. But in the end, we didn't use any of them. But all of that kind of, it's just trying to use what you have and the budget you have. For us, at least, that's the way I've always thought about it. I just tried to do as much with as little as possible, because I think we ended up shooting this on a budget of, it was basically all travel costs. It was probably about £150, mainly just for the fuel and to stay over at a youth hostel for a couple of days. And that was pretty much it.
It'd be a good lesson though in seeing how research and networking help you build up the relationship with the area and to make the film itself.
Mm-hmm. We were also really fortunate because of the weather. So on one of our test days, it was so windy, even with a tripod, some of the shots which were shaking too much. So I also had to try to plan around the weather and, where the sun was going to be, which, we're starting to get into cinematography a bit, but we all kind of chipped in a bit there. Because what was quite interesting was, the two groups, a camera each, and we split off so that we can make the most of the 2 days, because we only had the budget to be there for 2 days, including travel. So, we did that. We had a kind of a vision, but we let each other get the shots we wanted. And then, as Marcel was saying, we just kind of painstakingly went through in the edit.
And are there any other filmmakers that any of you really identify with or seek inspiration from?
Go on, Dan, mention The Lighthouse. If you don't, someone's going to say
it. Yeah, The Lighthouse was an inspiration. At first, the idea came up, what if we shoot the documentary in black and white because it's Whitby and stuff. And then I saw The Lighthouse, and I was convinced. But that was, that influenced the atmosphere quite a bit. For me, I think it's one of the best films from, 2019? But generally, other filmmakers that I'm into are, because lately I've been watching, it doesn't matter what, if it's animated or a live action film. I've been watching animated films from Japan and Studio Ghibli, of course, Hayao Miyazaki.
Studio Ghibli. Yep.
Yeah, Hayao Miyazaki is a big inspiration, and I just like directors and artists that, they like Hayao Miyazaki. They find what they like doing. They're not very, they don't care about much of what the industry does exactly, or how what kind of an agenda they should have in it. Just purely express themselves and commit to it fully. And Hayao Miyazaki is one of those people, as well as David Lynch, also one of those people. Um,
Erasing it
Kubrick is
definitely makes
another.
an impression on people the first time they see it.
Yeah, when they stand out, and people that are not really concerned with how a film is going to be perceived, but they just, venture into themselves deeply, and they found some, when they find some certain creativity or imagination, and trying to express that through a film, or paintings. I'm very into paintings as well, and impressionism, and that not realistic painting, but you know, um, as well as Kubrick. I've been a pretty big fan of Kubrick for a while.
Go on, Dan. Name some of the painters so we know how clever you are.
All right. If you want to know how clever I am, well, there's Monet that I'm a big fan of, and mostly Van Gogh, which I've been to the museum a few times. But there's some. In Norway, we have a history of like nationalistic painters that paint nature, because it's a pretty big part of Norway, and a pretty big image of it. So we have Hans Gude. I don't know if that rings the bell, but nationalist painters from Norway.
Fantastic. So, rest of you, any other filmmakers that influence you?
For this film in general, I didn't particularly have any kind of visual or narrative inspirations. I do have some in general, but I mainly, instead of being drawn to the specific filmmaker, it's normally kind of the tone. So I quite enjoy some of Thomas Vinterberg's work, and some of David Fincher's stuff as well, which is, it's probably heard quite a lot from film students, but I will stand by it. I do enjoy a good David Fincher film. But obviously that isn't so much related to this. I don't know if Marcel, you had something in mind with the edit.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I thought actually was kind of interesting about A Place for Sailors is when you look at it, there are a lot of similarities to The Lighthouse. The whole 4:3, the black and white. But what's interesting about it is, I think that, at least in my eyes, when we went into it, we had an idea for the tone we wanted to capture, but the choices, like the 4:3, we originally didn't plan on having it 4:3. We wanted it to be, what was it, 5:3, I think. And because it was that perfect medium when we were intending on including Jeff, of fitting both face and landscape, one aspect ratio that would support both. And then when we started stripping it down to just sort of the environment and capturing that, we eventually moved to 4:3 because it just felt the most appropriate. It really gave it that picturesque sort of portrait feeling. So although there are those similarities, and it was definitely in the back of our minds, I still feel like we did make our choices for the film best, for what we wanted to tell, not necessarily trying to emulate something else.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, guys. David or Ross and Marcel, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you
for having us here.
Thanks for having us.
And A Place for Sailors is available for our audience to watch as part of the Deep Fried Film Festival. This has been Pulled Focus. Keep liking, keep sharing, and keep following us for more shows.